In 1912, Orange County, California was a mostly rural, agricultural region with about 40,000 residents. It had split off from Los Angeles County just 22 years earlier. The county seat was in the small town of Santa Ana, California, which then had a population of about 12,000. Law enforcement in the county at the time primarily was the responsibility of the county's sheriff, along with his undersheriff and about 10 deputies. On December 15, 1912, a drifter from Oregon assaulted two teenage girls at a bean farm not far from Irvine Station. The ensuing hunt for the attacker led to a ferocious gun battle near an area in the foothills of the Santa Ana Mountains known as Tomato Springs. Looking at this quiet children's playground in the city of Irvine's Tomato Springs Park, you might not believe that this once was the site of a deadly gunfight that involved a desperado who was to become known as the Tomato Springs Bandit. Back in 1912, Orange County's Tomato Springs looked pretty much like this. Fed by meltwater from the Santa Ana Mountains, these springs were surrounded by wild tomato plants. No one paid any attention to the drifter who was wandering across James Irvine's San Joaquin Ranch at midday on Sunday, December 15, 1912. Late in the afternoon of the 15th, he stopped at William Cook's ranch looking for work. Cook raised beans on land leased from Mr. Irvine. His bean fields were near the location of what later was to become the El Toro Marine Air Base. The drifter was told that no work was available, so he moved on, but not before noticing Cook's 16-year-old niece Myrtle, who with her younger sister was visiting the Cooks for the Christmas holidays. Later that evening, the drifter bought a meal at Harry Spencer's house about 2 miles away. The assault leading to the shootout took place at about 7 in the evening when the drifter returned to Cook's ranch. The Cook's dog, which was outside at the time, noticed the drifter and began to bark. Mr. Cook then sent Myrtle and her 13-year-old sister Jessie outside to tie up the dog. By then night had fallen and they carried a lantern to light the way. Suddenly, the drifter, armed with a revolver, confronted them. He said, "Don't scream or I'll kill you both." He then fired a round into the ground to show that he meant business. He asked who was the older of the two, and Myrtle replied that she was. He ordered her to put out the lantern, which she did, but not before raising it to his face and seeing that it was the same person who had been there earlier in the afternoon. At that point, the drifter pulled out a rope and tied Jessie to a fence post. Then he forced Myrtle to a haystack behind the barn, where he assaulted her. About the same time, Jessie had managed to free herself from the fence post, and she ran screaming towards the house. Mr. Cook heard Jessie's screams and met her outside the house. Cook then headed for the barn, but was driven back by 2 gunshots from the bandit. Cook did not own any firearms, so he jumped on a horse and raced to his brother's place to get help. The two then drove around to other neighbors to get more help, but by the time they returned to Cook's ranch, the bandit had fled. Sheriff Ruddock, who was dealing with a domestic dispute in Brea, California, some 20 miles to the north at the time, was notified of the crime by telephone. He dispatched deputies from Santa Ana who joined the hunt for the culprit by lantern light. The searchers were able to follow the track of his hobnail boots towards the foothills, but because of the darkness, they called off the search at 2 in the morning. Shortly before daybreak, the desperado appeared at Ed Chambers' ranch near Tomato Springs and demanded breakfast from the cook. He then stalked off, boasting that if anybody comes looking for me, they can find me in the hills. The dashed line in this diagram shows the path the culprit took to his position in the foothills where the shootout took place. A marks the location where the crime was committed. B marks his path. C is the ranch house where he demanded breakfast. D, his position during the shootout. E marks the locations on both sides of the ravine where dozens of posse members who by now had shown up were located. And F is where a line of heavily armed militiamen would ultimately be positioned. The exact sequence of events that day is a bit uncertain. Undersheriff Robert Squires and Deputy Sheriff Tex Stacy were the first lawmen to join the pursuing ranchers as the sun rose that morning. Stacy and Squires, both armed with revolvers, tried to circle around behind the bandit. They were met with rapid fire from the bandit, who was armed with a Winchester rifle. Squires fell mortally wounded, and Stacy was hit in his right arm. He switched his revolver to his left hand and continued firing until the bandit shot the gun out of his hand and wounded him in the torso. By that time, Sheriff Ruddock had arrived along with Marshal Jernigan and Constable Jackson. These three lawmen tried to reach the fallen Squires and Stacy, but were driven back by the rifle shots from the culprit. Word of the ongoing gunfight had reached Santa Ana by 8:30 that morning, and Company L of the local National Guard was activated, most likely without the knowledge of the governor, to join the fray. At 10:30 in the morning, Sheriff Ruddock, along with posse members Harry Tubbs, William Culver, and Albert Prather, tried again to reach the downed Squires and Stacy. The bandit opened fire again, hitting Prather and Culver. Ruddock and Tubbs were able to drag the wounded men to safety. Deputy Stacy eventually recovered from his wounds, but Prather's wounds would prove fatal. Culver, who had been hit in the knee, also recovered, but his leg had to be amputated. The militia arrived on the scene at about 11 a.m. A platoon of Company L's men was deployed along the foot of the ravine shortly thereafter. The task of flushing out the bandit was assigned to a small team of guardsmen led by Captain Nate Ulm, who at 11:30 a.m., along with Lieutenant Towler, Sergeant Ekman, and Private Davies, began moving uphill in a half-crouch position, firing as they went. At noon, the bandit was driven from his perch, with gunfire from dozens of rifles on both ridges ringing out. He tried to reach another deep draw, but went down in the brush. Sheriff Ruddock then yelled, "Rush him," and scores of armed men poured into the canyon. The bandit started moving down into the gulch, but fell again. Shortly thereafter, the pursuers found him face down, dead, with an apparently self-inflicted bullet hole through his left temple. The heroic Undersheriff Robert Squires, shown on the left, was the first Orange County officer of the law to die in the line of duty. The Tomato Springs bandit, shown on the right, was later identified as Joe Matlock, an ex-convict from Oregon. Many wondered why he hadn't attempted to flee after committing his dastardly crime here in Orange County. That riddle was solved when his autopsy revealed that he was in the advanced stages of tuberculosis. In essence, he was a dead man walking who was intent on taking as many with him as possible before he expired. I am fond of saying that there is never a dull moment here in the OC, and as the Tomato Springs shootout exemplifies, that has been true since the very early days here in the county. If you have enjoyed this bit of Orange County, California history, please subscribe to my channel. Also, please take some time to view some of my other videos.